EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and let's talk about some misconceptions in the game of Magic. This is going to fold into my whole rules series, talking about the rules in the game of Magic and wrong cards, all that kind of stuff. I've been doing a lot of videos like that recently. This one is sort of a culmination of all of that stuff. All of the misconceptions that I hear a lot from players, typically in the comments, right? And that's what this video will be dealing mostly with. I see comments that people make on videos of mine, and I'm like, actually, that's not correct. Or they just have a question that needs clarifying, and why not do it in video form like this so that everyone can have that stuff clarified, right? That's how I originally started this. I did my original 3 rules that you might be getting wrong video based off of 3 comments that I had saw on videos. And rather than just responding to those people in the comments, I actually made a video about it so that other people could have those things clarified for them. I made a short called The Biggest Misconception in Magic, which now is currently the most viewed video on my entire channel, and I am still, ironically, getting comments on that video where people are telling me that I'm wrong or that doesn't work that way. So the fact that I'm calling it the biggest misconception, I might actually be correct about that. I also made another short about Teferi's protection and how to get around it. I still am getting people commenting on that video about you can't attack the person or damage is prevented so it doesn't do anything and all this kind of stuff. I actually covered that in a rules video talking specifically about protection and why that actually does work. So now everyone who comments on that video telling me I'm wrong, I can just point them towards that video, I guess. And everyone that is going to tell me that I'm wrong about my biggest misconception short, I can now point them towards this video as well, I guess. So what did I talk about in that video? Well, what I talked about in that video is one thing that I hear all the time from Magic players when they're commenting on my videos or in other places is I have something in play that is maybe activating an ability. And the example I used in that video was Arcanus the Omnipotent. I'm tapping it to draw 3 cards. My opponent removes it in response. And of course, I don't get the card draw because now it's gone. That's the misconception, right? The misconception is that you don't get the card draw. And of course, you do. I've activated the ability. The draw 3 cards ability goes on the stack. Someone removes my Arcanus. The ability is still on the stack and it will still resolve even after my Arcanus is long gone. And I will still get the card draw. If my opponent tries to kill it beforehand, I can activate it in response. There's very few ways to not get my 3 card draw off of my Arcanus as long as it doesn't have summoning sickness, right? Obviously, they have summoning sickness. I can't tap it right away. As long as it doesn't have summoning sickness, I am guaranteed to get that card draw unless my opponent stifles it, right? A stifle type of effect that specifically says counter target activated ability because that ability goes on the stack. I stifle it so that it will not resolve. Just like with a counter spell, if you cast a spell, you counter it, it doesn't resolve. So stifle will work there. The other only card that I can think of that will work with this Arcanus situation is Sudden Death, a card that has some of the coolest art I've ever seen in a card. It doesn't really see a whole lot of play in the Commander format, has Split Second, and Split Second does work really, really well in the Commander format. That's one of the reasons why Croson Grip has been so popular in the Commander format for such a long time. Sudden Death doesn't get nearly as much love, even though it can be really good and does work in this situation. Target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn. And of course, Split Second means as long as this spell is on the stack, players can't cast spells or activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. So that means if my opponent has that Arcanus, I can kill it with Sudden Death and they cannot respond by tapping and drawing 3 cards. Now, again, if they've already tapped their Arcanus to draw 3 cards and I respond with Sudden Death, they still get the card draw because that ability has been put on the stack already and I'm not dealing with anything on the stack. I'm only dealing with the creature it came from. Let me be very clear here. If they tap it first to draw the 3 cards and then I Sudden Death it, it will do nothing. I mean, it will kill the Arcanus, but they'll still get the card draw. If I Sudden Death first, the Arcanus will die and they will not be able to respond because, of course, Split Second specifically says that they can't activate abilities in response, right? So that is the one situation where you can actually get your opponent's creature off the table without them responding, right? Again, people have been doing this with Croson Grip since forever. That card started getting used in the format all the time, mostly because of Sensei's Divining Top, because anyone trying to get a Sensei's Divining Top off the table, what does your opponent do? Well, they just tap it in response, right? Put it back on top of their library, draw a card. So it's a really, really difficult card to get off the table. Croson Grip is the Sensei's Divining Top Killer, right? That's one of the reasons why people started playing that card all the time, is because it doesn't allow them to tap the Sensei's Divining Top in response. I had a guy commenting on that video that really did not want to agree with me no matter what direction I went in, and I'm going to bring up what they specifically said here just to clarify again for other people so they're not getting it wrong. Another way to stop it is to use a control card or deck. If he taps for X ability, you can respond with before that and proceed with a forced tap ability if you do so. It will be as if it were tapped before he even considered to tap it for that ability. And no, it does not stack because you tapped it before they even tried to use it. And my response to them was, there's no such thing as before that in Magic. That phrase before that does not exist. If someone decides to do something on their turn, you can't say, oh, before that. No. There is no before that. When someone does something, if they have priority, and again, maybe this individual doesn't understand what priority is. If you have priority, you do a thing. Nobody can do anything before that. They can respond to what you've done. So if I cast a spell, they can respond by doing something. They can respond by countering it. If I activate an ability, they can respond by removing my creature, although it probably won't do anything. They can respond with a stifle, which will counter that ability. But there is no before that. You can't undo something that has already been done. You can only counter something that has already been done. So once I activate that ability, it is on the stack. You cannot then say, oh, before you do that, I'm tapping your creature down, which is, I think, what this individual is saying. Sorry, that doesn't work. My creature's already tapped. Arcanus's ability says tap to draw 3 cards. The activation cost, and now I'm getting into the whole concept of how activated abilities work, right? As I say all the time, that colon means it's an activated ability, and the part that comes before the colon is the activation cost. In order for me to even use that ability, my Arcanus has to tap. As soon as I go to use that ability, my Arcanus is now tapped, so tapping my Arcanus beforehand does nothing, and again, in response, does nothing. If you want to tap my Arcanus to make it so that I can't use that ability, okay, I'll just tap it in response and draw 3 cards. So that does nothing. If you want to say, oh, no, before you tap your Arcanus, I'm going to tap it down. No, that doesn't work either because I've already tapped it to draw 3 cards. So either way, that does nothing in this scenario. There is no such thing as before that in the game of Magic. This person further said, it stays on the stack. It does not resolve unless the player lets you. He can respond anytime, even if you are doing nothing at all. Incorrect. You cannot respond anytime, even if you're doing nothing at all. I specifically talked about this in my stack video. If a player has priority, typically on their turn, you cannot do anything until you have something to respond to. It's my turn. I'm doing what I want. And if I am just sitting there twiddling my thumbs, you can't cast any spells. You can't tap anything. You can't activate abilities. You can do literal nothing until I do something that you can then respond to. Or if I'm changing phases, again, that's the other scenario where you can respond or you can activate or cast spells or do something if I'm moving into a different phase. I'm in my main phase. Now I'm going to combat. Now you have the opportunity to have priority and actually do something. Also, this phrase about unless that player lets you makes me think that this person has a very interesting play group that they play in because, of course, you don't have to ask permission for anything. In the game of Magic, you just do what you want and your opponents have to interact with it. There is no asking the table if I can do things. I mean, I guess you can be super polite and ask, can I cast an Elishnorn? Is that going to be okay? I suppose you could do that, but you don't have to. You do what you want and your opponents have to deal with what you're doing. As long as it's inside the rule of the game, you do not have to announce what you are doing in a game. I don't know if people are actually doing this, but you don't have to say, I'm going to do this thing. Is that okay? Or I'm going to do a thing. Does anybody want to do something before I do that thing? I think that is what this individual is getting at. So if I want to cast my Elishnorn, I have to announce it first. I'm going to cast an Elishnorn. Anybody want to do anything first? No, you just say, I'm casting an Elishnorn. Again, if you have priority. If it's your turn, you got priority, you just say, I'm casting Elishnorn, and you tap the mana. There is no announcing unless you're actually doing it. You don't have to prepare the table for what you're doing. Again, there might actually be some playgroups out there that think that is the case. You can be super polite if you want to, right? If you want to tell everyone what you're doing before you actually do it, I guess you could, right? There's nothing say you can't. Inside the rules of the game, you don't have to ask permission to do anything. You just do the stuff you want to as long as you're following the rules. Again, continuing on with the same individual, you can do so if and only if the player allows it. Again, this is not a Magic game term. Allows it? There's no such thing in the game of Magic as allow it. There's no such thing as before that. You do not have to ask permission. You just do what you want, and if somebody wants to stop you, they can counter it or remove it or stifle it or whatever. If you are talking about Elixir of Mortality, if you proceed to activate it before asking the player if he allows it or not, that's your own fault if the player responds by tapping it, and if he tapped it, it does not activate because it's tapped by a second source. It's not being tapped for activation. Have a nice day. Okay, I mean, I absolutely had to tackle this specific comment. There's so much wrong in this comment, and I'm not trying to dunk on this individual. That's why I'm not mentioning their actual name. There's so much wrong with this statement that I just have to deal with it specifically. And I actually had discussed this with some of my patrons, and I had one of them say, I think this person might be a Yu-Gi-Oh player or possibly a Pokemon player. And that is part of the issue I had with that original video, is a lot of people said Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh players sometimes think this because that's how it works in those games. So I think there's a lot of crossover, right, with Magic players and those other games where there are similarities, obviously. They're trading card games, right? Never played them myself, but I assume there's some similarities, and they're bringing the way that game works over into Magic, and that is not the case, all right? So I'm going to go over everything that is wrong with this statement, and there's a lot. So you cannot do so only if the player allows it? Nope, there's no such thing. Again, I don't know if that's how it works in those other games. There's no such thing as that player allows it, other than they're just got a fistful of counter spells and they're just going to counter everything you do. What they used to call permission decks. A permission deck was they just have an endless amount of counter spells. You know, it was sort of an inside joke where you're just asking permission to cast stuff. You don't actually have to do that. It was sort of a joke. You don't have to ask permission to do stuff. People don't allow you to do stuff. You just do it. If you are talking about Elixir of Mortality, if you proceed to activate it before asking the player if they allow it or not, again, you don't have to. You have an Elixir of Mortality in play, you just activate it if you have priority, if it's your turn, right? If it's not your turn, say you want to activate it on your opponent's turn, you just wait until they pass priority. Again, another important aspect of gameplay. They have priority because it's their turn. As soon as they pass priority, now you have the opportunity to activate your Elixir of Immortality. There is no allowing it. You don't have to ask permission to do it. If that player now responds by tapping it, which is what they're talking about here, that's fine. I'll just then respond to what they're doing, right? Whatever they're using, they got a Fate Stitcher in play, and they're going to now tap down my Elixir of Immortality. Okay, now I get to respond. I'm going to respond to you tapping down my Elixir of Immortality by activating it myself. So that scenario doesn't work, right? If you're trying to tap down my Elixir of Immortality so I can't use it, I'll just tap it down in response, assuming I have the mana available to use it. And in this situation, again, we're going to assume I have the mana available to activate that ability. So I pay the 2, I tap my Elixir of Immortality. That ability will go on the stack after your tapping, and it will resolve first, right? Again, if we're getting into the whole stack discussion, first in, last out. Whatever is the first ability on the stack will be the last to resolve. So your Fate Stitcher is going to resolve last. My Elixir of Immortality is long gone by the time your Fate Stitcher resolves. Now, if we're going to reverse the scenario here, I want to activate my Elixir of Immortality, and in response, you're going to tap it down so I can't use it. The only problem there, again, I don't have to ask permission. I'm just doing it. Pay 2 and tap is the activation cost. I don't have to announce to the table that I'm about to activate my Elixir of Immortality, and if anybody wants to do anything before I do that. Again, there is no such thing as before that. There's just, I do it. I activate my Elixir of Immortality. In order to activate that ability before it ever goes on the stack, I gotta pay 2 and tap. That's the activation cost. The activation cost always happens. There is no way for it not to happen. I'll go back to a scenario that I talked about in a video years ago with Aetherflux Reservoir, right? Again, I talked about how Stifle's a great card, works particularly good against Aetherflux Reservoir. And the reason why is because the activation cost for Aetherflux Aetherflux Reservoir is pay 50 life. And I had a response on that video where someone said, yeah, but that's not very good because they'll just pay 50 life again after you stifle it. How much life do they have? I mean, you got to pay the 50 life. If I stifle your Aetherflux Reservoir, the activation cost is still paid. That's what's so great about that play. Essentially, I made you pay 50 life for nothing. In order to put that Aetherflux Reservoir ability of dealing 50 damage to any target on the stack, the activation cost has to be paid. So your life is long gone. You already paid the life. Then I stifle it. The ability, of course, doesn't happen because it has been stifled. It's been countered, but you don't get your life back. Your life is long gone. So you would have to have over 100 life in order to activate that Aetherflux Reservoir again. The activation cost is always paid, regardless of what the outcome is after the fact, whether it's countered or whatever. Just like if you're paying for a spell, right? Someone counters your spell, do you get to untap the mana again? No, you already paid the mana to cast the spell. All of that is said and done, and there is no going back. I activate my Elixir of Immortality by paying 2 and tapping it. If you now choose to tap my Elixir of Immortality, lots of luck with that. It's already tapped. Tapping it now will do literal nothing. It's been tapped. The ability is on the stack. Go nuts tapping it. It isn't going to do anything. I've already activated the ability. Same with the Arcanist, the Omnipotent. If I tap that to draw 3 cards, the activation is tap. That means if you now want to choose to tap my Arcanist, have fun. It's already tapped. You're going to be wasting your time to do it. The ability is already on the stack. Just like my original example of if I tap my Arcanist to draw 3 cards and then you remove it, does nothing. I mean, it gets rid of my Arcanist. I guess I shouldn't say it does nothing. It doesn't stop the ability from happening. It will still resolve and I will still draw my 3 cards. There is some real fundamental issues here, right, that people might be missing. And when I read some of these comments, I'm just like, oh man, are people actually playing the game of Magic like this? I mean, it's fine. It will work. Again, I had a comment from a guy that said, me and my playgroup thought that when a creature blocked, it then tapped after you declared it as a blocker. I thought that was kind of funny. It's not going to ruin the game. If your whole playgroup thinks that blocking creatures tap, it will certainly change the outcome a little bit, especially in a 4-player format like Commander, where you might want to use those blockers on someone else's turn, right? Sometimes these misconceptions can be a little bit of a wrinkle in your gameplay, and sometimes, like in this situation, it can be huge. I mean, can you imagine playing in a playgroup where every time you do something, you have to announce it to the table and see if they're okay with it before you do it? Or you give everyone an opportunity to do stuff before you cast your Elish Norn or before you activate your Arcanist? That really changes the fundamental outcome of how the game of Magic works. That's a massive one, right? That's not just a little thing like our tapped creatures are blocking. That's a big one. That is fundamental Magic the Gathering stuff, which is why I absolutely had to make this video to correct these kinds of things. Right? I'm not trying to dunk on people necessarily. I mean, maybe I'm trying to dunk on this guy a little bit because he was pretty rude to me, but these kinds of misconceptions I like making videos for so that people know going forward. In the specific situation of I'm activating an ability of something that I have, like that Arcanist or maybe an Isochron Scepter or something like that, removing it in response does not undo the ability. I have already activated it. It's already on the stack. Yes, you can get rid of that permanent that put the ability on the stack, but you're not specifically dealing with that thing that is on the stack now, right? The battlefield is where my creature exists. The stack is where that ability exists. Those are 2 separate places. You want to deal with my stuff on the battlefield? Fine, you can use removal for that. But if you want to deal with my stuff on the stack, there's separate cards for dealing with that, right? Like counter spells and stifle effects. And that's what you would have to use in order to do so. I hope that did clarify. That's why I make these videos. Let me know in the comments if you guys have anything else that needs clarification. I do like making videos like this. Particularly, I like making videos like these Magic Rules ones because it's nice to have us all on the same page, right? So that there's not all this confusion. So let me know if you have any burning questions in the comments below. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.